you talk about what the experience was for you coming into Holston Gases and that succession plan?
I worked at Holston as a kid growing up before, I would say, college age through high school and stuff like that. And did a lot of the more the manual labor stuff, cylinder maintenance, yard work, building pallets, breaking down pallets, painting cylinders, sandblasting cylinders. So I did a lot of that when I was younger, and then went off to University of Miami and got a degree, and then came back and knew that I wanted to work in the industry. But I think the only thing that we've done a little bit differently than some other outfits is my dad and Robert Anders, our CEO, the current president of GATA, thought it'd be a good idea to go work with one of our partners. And in our case, our main supplier was Praxair at the time. So I went to work at PDI right out of college. So before I ever came to Holston after getting a degree, I went to work for PDI in Atlanta and in the South, in South Carolina, and a couple of different places. But I worked for PDI for 3 or 4 years before I came back to Holston. So the way they joke about that is I got a bunch of my scar tissue on somebody else's dime. But it was really good experience. And getting to work with your supplier was also really good too, because when I left and came back to Holston, I knew a lot of people at Praxair that I'd worked with and dealt with across the whole country. I think that was a really good experience, and I didn't do it for 10 years or whatever. I did it for 3 or 4, and that was a really good place to start.
Yeah, that's a really smart move on Robert and your dad's part to have you go to Praxair and understand what the supplier side is like as well. Would that be something you would recommend someone to do? Would you say, hey, yeah, go work outside of your company for a few years and then come back? Like, how did that help you?
Absolutely. You grow up a little bit, and you're learning from somebody that's not your family, which there's plenty to be learned from your family, but it's good to hear constructive criticism about the job that you're doing and all that from somebody outside of your family they know that you're not going to be there for the next 30 years. So they're going to give you some pretty honest feedback. And I felt like I got that at PDI and at Praxair. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend that.
Very cool. And you're 3rd generation, right, at Holston?
Correct.
So did you know from the jump, did they have a plan laid out for you, or how did that develop?
No, I think that it's hard to make a plan further out than a few years. We were trying to work on some kind of 3-year plan, and it changed as Holston grew and as I grew up a little bit too. So I think making plans for anything more than 5 years is pretty tough, because there's a lot of things that happen in life that you can't predict, and in business that you can't predict. We tried to do a 3 to 5 year plan every time we revisited something. And the time with Praxair was about 3 to 4 years, and that was about perfect. And once I got back to Holston, it was still 2, 3, 4 years, instead of getting too far out in the future, where I think when I came back to the business, my dad was in his late 50s. So he's still the chairman of our board, and Robert would have been about 8 years younger than that. So right at 50. And so those guys had a ton of run left. And so it would have been crazy to make a plan that would have been 15 years down the road, at least in our view. Mm-hmm. So we did 3 to 4 year plans, just little 3 to 4 year plan packages. And that's worked out really well.
I love that. Yeah. And if you could go back to when you're coming out of college and entering into the business, or even when you're coming back from Praxair, are there certain questions that you would have asked around succession planning, or questions you maybe had that they answered for you?
Well, our family was very open about that. It made it much easier that I had, as you mentioned earlier, there was 4 kids. My mom and my dad had 4 kids, and 3 of them weren't really interested. So that made it fairly easy. So it didn't get too complex there. But no, I think transparency is a big thing. What are you going to be doing when you come back? What's your exact job task, not your title? We're not big on titles, but what's your task? How long do you think that you need to prove yourself in that task to continue to be in that succession plan? Because we didn't really believe in anointing anybody at any point. So it was being able to prove yourself and how long you needed to prove yourself in that role before you maybe moved on to something else. Was that 6 months working in the plant and now you're in sales, or was it a year or 2 in the plant and a year or 2 in sales, or 10 years in sales, or whatever it is? So I think that knowing a timeline of what positions you think are important to know about, which I would think all of them are, and then how long you need to spend in each one. So maybe a timeline would be a good way of saying that, of a timeline of tasks
Mm-hmm.
and learning what it takes to do those jobs.
Absolutely. And you talked about the fact that your family was always very open about succession planning. That is really a very difficult thing for people, for families to be. And I've been noticing that through the different interviews that I've been doing around succession planning. I don't know if there's an answer to this, and if not, it's okay. But what would be your advice to families that want to be open? Or maybe, I guess, a better way of phrasing it could be, what did you guys do that allowed that transparency and openness?
Yeah. One thing I'll give my dad a lot of credit for was he started doing that very early, when he knew that he was still going to be around for a long time and he was still going to run the business for a long time. He didn't wait until the last year that he thought he was going to be running the company. He did that very early and had some honest conversations with, I think, his kids and everybody. Hey, what do you want to do? Do you have any interest in this? But doing that early and not doing that maybe in your 40s or 50s where you're trying to transition from some completely different career. But is this going to be your career or not? And just answer that question early, because then you can kind of start ruling people in or out pretty early. So, yeah, I think just doing it early, being on an early schedule and not waiting, because all kinds of crazy things happen. And with life and family and kids and parents and grandparents and everything. So it's better to do it early, I think, than wait till you have to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Talking with Jack Butler, he made a very similar point. He was like, succession planning is event driven. Someone retires, or God forbid someone passes, or someone gets sick. And so you might as well have the plan in place early on, so that when that event happens, you can jump in. Sounds very similar to that. Okay, and then Robert Anders is outside of the company as your CEO. How has that benefited you?
Outside of the family.
Yeah, sorry, I meant
Yeah,
outside
yeah.
of the family.
Yeah. So I think having somebody out from outside the family who's got expertise is a great benefit. And it also gave me somebody that I could work with, take advice from, take criticism from, that wasn't my dad.
Mhm.
And I love my dad and respect my dad, but we've had plenty of conversations my entire life. And so it's nice to professionally have somebody else that is also around, not between me and my dad, but somebody else that is not on that family love and connection level where the advice is purely professional. I'm great friends with Robert, have been almost my whole life, but he's also not my dad. He's a friend and a confidant and all that. And being able to remove some of that family emotion and relationship is a good thing.
I love that. Okay, a question for you. When you have difficult conversations with your dad, like I know for myself, right? I have to go to my dad sometimes and have these difficult conversations. And when you're in family business, it's a little bit more emotional to have those discussions. How do you and your father have those difficult discussions and be able to stay level-headed with it?
I think having them without anybody else around is really good advice, where it becomes a conversation that is professional but is also personal because it's your family. And if other people from the family aren't in the business, then it's just you and that other person that's in your family in the business. And so I think it's good to have those without other people around, number one. But two, just not being afraid to offend your dad or your mom or your uncle or your aunt or whoever you're in the business with, your brother, your sister. Being able to be blunt, it's better to say it out loud, just like in any personal relationship you have, than harbor stuff and not say it out loud. So I think just being open and blunt and doing it privately, instead of, you don't want to do it in front of 10 people on your senior staff or something like that. That's not the appropriate place for that conversation, because then everybody feels awkward. Oh, Marie and her dad are talking now, and now it's, ooh, I'm not going to say anything.
Absolutely. Your dad said something similar. He quoted the coach of Duke and said that when you respect someone, you're honest and truthful with them. So that's how you have to be. But yeah, I agree. If you're having those personal conversations, or those conversations that are like teetering both sides of personal and business in front of your upper management or any employees. It also, yeah, it's anxiety. And then they're also like, is everything good? Should I be worried about my job? What's happening here? So yeah, completely agree with that. Privacy is always good amongst family members in business. Okay. What advice would you give to the current generation in regards to succession planning or maybe even passing the torch?
I think that one thing my dad did that I really admired and still admire is remembering the importance of family over your professional life. People talk about all this work life balance, personal life balance stuff, and I don't live to work. I work to live. And so I think knowing that you'd rather have a good relationship with your mom or your dad or your uncle or your aunt, your brother or your sister is more important than whose title is going to be whatever. So I think remembering that you're a family, that you love each other and all that is should trump some of those business conversations. And if you can remember that, then you might not get as heated or get your feathers ruffled as much. And so I think remembering that it's your family. When you love your family, that helps. And a lot of people too often forget that, I think.
That was beautiful. Okay. And then another question, or along the same lines, do you have advice for the next generation coming in around succession planning?
I would say be like aggressively patient, I guess, is those sound like antonyms, but I had to be patient with a lot of things when I came into the business where I had people above me that certainly knew more about the business than I did, but it was my family's business. So I felt like I should have some kind of opinion or feeling about it, about what was going on. So you got to be patient to where you gain enough knowledge to be respected and your opinion to be respected before you start voicing your opinion. So maybe take a couple of years inside the business if you're just starting in it to know that your opinion is going to be respected. It's hard to voice your opinion when it's not respected and then 2 or 3 years later regain respect. So I'd probably just say be patient until you know what you're talking about.
That's really good advice. So to wrap up our conversation, is there anything you think is like pertinent information that I should include during this panel or something I haven't asked that might lead to some good discussion?
I think the transparency issue is really a big thing. And if everybody knows what's going on early on in their life, I don't mean when you're 10 or 20, but maybe 20s or 30s, you can understand how the business is structured and how it would need to continue if it's going to continue, then everybody knows. And then they can make their own adult decision, young adult decision about what they want to do with their life. Mm-hmm. If they don't know, then it's really hard to make those decisions. Do I stay with my family's business even though I don't know whether I'm ever going to own it? Am I going to have to buy it from my mom or my dad or my siblings or uncle? Am I going to have to go into debt to be able to do this? If so, how much debt? So you have to have a little bit of exposure, I think, to the books. I don't think it has to be complete 100% disclosure, but I think that clarity and just openness about how the business is doing and then what you would need to do if you were going to do this for the rest of your career, I think is important. And if you don't have those details, then you don't know what you're getting into. So you have to know what you're getting into to get into it.
Absolutely. My dad always says, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I was talking with Bill, he was also explaining that you have to fill the seats. Like once you move up, that seat needs to be filled, right? Or whoever's moving up in the company, you need to fill their seats. So he was explaining the transparency that you have from top to bottom of where people are going in 3 to 5 years or 1 year, 2 years. Maybe they're a salesperson now, but they're going to be becoming a manager. And so making sure they have that like executive training and they actually want that role. And sounds like you all put a lot of effort into that.
Yep. We have 2 kind of tracks of planning succession for any kind of management position, whether it's just a manager in a market or a VP or someone at another level, is what is your planned succession? And then what is your Mack truck situation where all of a sudden tomorrow you're hit by a Mack truck, you're gone, who needs to replace you? So if there's no planning at all, who's your replacement? And then if you have all the planning in the world, who's your replacement and how long does that take? So I think having two tracks on that's
Mm-hmm.
important because both can happen.
Oh, that's excellent. I might adapt that myself. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I do have one thing to add.
Okay.
When you were asking about what advice would you give to the next generation,
Mm-hmm.
I would say know the history of the company and particularly the people from the history of the company, that a lot of people that have been there for a long time have known and worked with those people more than you have. And so those names that are legends within your own company, know those names and know what they did and how long they were there and the great things that they did for the company, because people that are older than you will remember those things. And if you don't know them, then they feel like you don't appreciate the history of the company. So definitely know those people that have done a lot for the company. And when people bring their names up and bring up stories and tell tall tales and all that, you ought to know who those people are. I've tried to do that a little bit, and knowing the legends of your company, I think, is an important thing.
Excellent advice. And especially in this industry, right? Like I always say, 1 year in this industry is like 3 or 4 years somewhere else because it's just so close knit and it's all relationship based. But yeah, okay, great. It was so nice getting to talk with you. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you.